So, today on the podcast, Epic Universe. When I initially envisioned today's episode, I thought a discussion of Epic as one section of our main news update. And then once I was in the park last month, I thought, no, it's more of a standalone topic. And by the time I started to pull together how I thought this park would change the dynamic between Disney and Universal in Florida, I simply came to the point where I realized there were multiple topics here, and to explore them fully and to chart out how this likely changes the Florida theme park landscape, while also talking about the park itself, would probably take a couple of episodes. And so that's what we have here today and also next week. And so with that, we've got a lot to cover, and we're just going to jump into it all. So, a couple weeks ago, in April, I went over to Epic Universe and saw the park during technical previews. I should say up front that not everything was working when I was there, most notably the battle for the Ministry of Magic attraction, which has been having some reliability issues. I've heard this pertains mostly to the AA figures. The other headliner dark ride, Monsters Unchained, was up and working but was also having issues with AA figures freezing up. But this is exactly what technical rehearsals are for, to identify bugs with an extremely limited audience and then to fix them before the park opens to the general public. I was there a month before its opening date, so there's a reasonable amount of time to work through any of these issues. Here I mostly want to frame our discussion today as to how does this park change the competitive landscape in Florida between Universal and Disney over the long haul. For the next 2 years, advantage clearly goes to Universal. They have brand new attractions, some of them extremely impressive, while Disney does not. In the business of theme parks, new attractions are always the largest driver of attendance. On Disney's side, as we've talked about over the last few years, none of the new attractions forthcoming, such as those in Tropical Americas, will open until 2027, so some advantage in 2025 and 2026 will clearly go over to Universal. The larger and more interesting question, I think, is how does this new park change the long-term competitive dialogue between the two resorts? Let me start with this. It is always wonderful to visit a new theme park, a place where every corner, every experience, each shop and restaurant is new to me. These experiences don't happen that often, and I'm always grateful when they come around. The one area at Epic that is absolutely stunning is the new Harry Potter land, which is themed to Paris in the 1920s. This is the most ornate and detailed land inside of Epic Universe, and it's hard for me to look at this area without seeing it as Universal planting a flag to signal that they have taken on Disney's designs directly and beaten them at it. Specifically, I'm thinking of Epcot's France Pavilion, and there are some direct design connections here. Though the France Pavilion at Epcot isn't themed to any historical area, it does have art, posters, and even some technology that suggest it leans towards the past, sort of like the Paris of the 1920s over at Epic. Like most World Showcase pavilions, Disney's France Pavilion uses forced or broken scale architecture to suggest height and depth in certain areas. And at the back of the France Pavilion, the new addition around Remy's Ratatouille Adventure is themed specifically to a Paris neighborhood. Now compare all of this to Epic. The design of the new Paris section at Epic Universe seems to be arranged to specifically say, "Dear Disney, we're aware of your World Showcase Pavilion, but now we'd like to do that one better." The World Showcase pavilions at Epcot are mostly arranged as an artistic representation of a country's architecture, art, music, and landscape design. It's a sampler platter. But does walking by the section in the Canada Pavilion themed to Bouchard Gardens make me feel as though I'm on Victoria Island? Or does going to the Stave Church in the Norway Pavilion make me feel as though I'm in Norway? Or does wandering through the back section of the France Pavilion make me feel as though I'm in Paris? No, it really doesn't. These are all lovely pavilions, but they're arranged as visual conglomerates of various countries or regions. But the Harry Potter area in Epic Universe moves beyond any sense of design in World Showcase. When you walk through the Wizarding World portal at Epic, you can't immediately see the land. There's a wall there specifically to delay your view of the streets of Paris. The design concept of delayed compression is used at Disney World, but often in the resort hotels, not so much in the parks. When you walk through the front entrance of either Jumbo House over at Animal Kingdom Lodge or Wilderness Lodge, you move through a small passageway that delays your ability to see the grandness of the tall and spectacular lobby. The same delaying strategy is used here at the entrance to the Wizarding World of Paris of the 1920s. The portal, as you leave it, presents you with a wide, nondescript white wall, essentially a visual barrier. Only when you move around it do you see the impressive height and depth of this area. The buildings here are 5 stories tall, no forced scale. 5 full-sized stories. There are cafes that look and smell like those in Paris, with indoor and outdoor seating. The streets are as wide as any city street. There are alleys and side avenues, and the sightlines here are managed so that there's no meaningful outside visual intrusion. There are bistro-style tables along the sidewalk. Windows are filled with merchandise and displays. In one window, you'll find an odd pile of locks along with a moving bowtruckle. That's a small plant-like creature from Fantastic Beasts who is skilled at picking locks. To me, even with the wizarding touches, it feels like being in Paris. It's been a while since I've been to France, but being inside of this area brought back memories of walking through the streets of Paris far more than any similar experience at World Showcase. Design-wise, this is the absolute high point of Epic Universe. There are side streets, alleys, and alcoves, and in that way, this area feels a little like Diagon Alley over at Universal Studios. It is truly an amazing accomplishment in design and presentation. But I should also point out that none of the other Portal lands have this level of immersive design. It would be a mistake to think that the other 3 Portal areas have this level of architectural theming. All the Portal areas are lovely, but this one here is the absolute standout, and by a lot. You can see where they spent the money, and they spent a lot of money to create this one land. In endless reviews and blog posts over the next few months, this new wizarding area will almost surely be compared to the World Showcase France Pavilion. And this almost surely is the point. It is a way for Universal Creative to say they have taken a design conceit originated at Disney and created something far more believable and compelling. It's the high point of the park, and this alone is probably worth a visit. Though Universal will surely market this park as a set of themed adventures leaning toward thrill experiences, and that right there is their usual crowd, one of the most impressive accomplishments here is the recreation of Paris, a place to wander and enjoy the meticulous theme. The New York Times has estimated that Epic Universe cost around $7 billion. I would assume that this also includes hotels and other nearby areas. But even with all that added in, this dollar figure seems high. But when I stand in the middle of this new wizarding area, I can see the money everywhere. But also when I'm in other areas of Epic Universe, I have trouble feeling the $7 billion-ness of the overall resort, even if you include things like the Helios Grand Hotel. This is not to take anything away from what is here. There are lovely touches everywhere, but the level of spend is far, far higher in the wizarding area than it is anywhere else in the park. So, is Epic Universe a Disney park killer? That's something I've been wondering for the past year or so. And my answer is, I don't really think so. It changes the overall competitive dialogue in Florida, but in specific ways, and mostly around specific age groups. So before I get back to other strengths of Epic Universe, and there are many strengths here, I want to talk about some limitations which will help put all of this in context. Or maybe think about it this way. From watching the themed experiences industry for years, I do think early reviewers of any new park tend to hit the positive notes very hard and often, and then only after months, perhaps a year, the shortcomings become apparent. There are strengths in Epic. There are some spectacular wow moments. But there are also some meaningful limitations here, a few of which really confuse me. So before we get too far in, let's talk about those for a bit, as that will give us some context, and then we'll move back over to the strengths. My first area of concern, and it's a big one, is park capacity and ride throughput issues. I don't know exactly how many people were in Epic Universe when I was there, nor do I know the theoretical capacity of the park. I don't even know the actual acreage. Universal only lists the overall plot size for the area, which is 750 acres, but that includes the park, hotel, parking lot, and a whole lot of open space. To me, the actual park feels just over 100 acres. I would put it somewhere around 120 acres, which includes a couple of large water features, more or less in line with Hollywood Studios. So I'm taking a general guess as to theoretical capacity. I've been going to theme parks for a long time, so my guess here is probably not perfect, but a reasonable ballpark figure. From the general feel, from the general number of parking spots left open, from the large number of empty seats in theater performances, I think the park was pretty close to 20% of capacity when I was there, maybe even a little less. I wouldn't be surprised if it was at 15%. I'm guessing that the maximum park capacity is somewhere around that of Hollywood Studios, meaning 75,000 people, give or take. And I think when I was there were about 13,000 to 15,000 people in the park. For a while, Bowser's Challenge, that's the Mario Kart ride, was a walk-on. This, along with the carousel, which is visually impressive, were the only walk-ons in the park. But even with an estimated 20% of capacity, most rides still had a 20 to 30 minute wait. Minecart Madness, which is the Donkey Kong ride, had a 90-minute wait, and I believe that was running with most, if not all, of its ride vehicles on the track. So overall, ride capacity here is going to be a tremendous issue when the park opens to the general public. I don't expect that Universal will initially open to full capacity after opening day, but even if they opened at around 50 or maybe 60% of capacity, and I'd say that's a pretty good guess, wait times for rides are going to be substantial. And if the park is ever at 100% of capacity, the park, as far as I can tell, will be mostly unworkable, with many queues hovering around the 4-hour mark, unless you have an express pass. And this was something else that I noted here. For some attractions, Universal has built fairly long express pass queues, which suggests that they are likely going to push the express pass option pretty hard. But to get back to the overall issue here, many rides at Epic will have a low hourly throughput, and I've got to say that there's a certain part of this conceit that I actually admire. Let me explain that. Since the mid-1960s, when over at Disney, Dick Nunes got a seat at the planning table for operations managers inside of the WED Design Building, rides there have been designed with input from operations, which are people that are mostly concerned with how rides will be maintained, how guests will move through new lands, and how many guests each attraction can handle each hour. Shortly after Nunes' people got a seat to talk about operational needs, Disney began to focus in the late 1960s on attractions of size that would accommodate thousands of people each hour. In the late 1960s, there was simply a list of people eater attractions that opened up over at Disneyland. Pirates of the Caribbean at Disneyland can typically accommodate about 3,100 people an hour. The now-defunct Adventure Through Inner Space could accommodate about 2,700 people per hour, Small World, 2,500 people an hour, and Haunted Mansion just a little less than that at 2,400 an hour. These are all rides that were opened just after the dialogue started between operations and design people. And even when Pirates at Disneyland has a long outdoor line, the queue wait time is rarely over 45 minutes because so many people can move through that experience each hour. The average wait time at Pirates for Disneyland is roughly 30 minutes. But also the input from operations put some meaningful restrictions on the ride systems and ride layouts that were then used in the park. There are very few high-throughput attractions over at Epic Universe, so let's take a look at how all of that works. There is Stardust Racers, a roller coaster with twin tracks. Each train holds about 20 people, so each launch is 40 people, with 1 to 2 launches per minute when it's running at full capacity. Let's say that full capacity for this attraction is around 4,000 people per hour. This is twice the capacity of Cosmic Rewind, which also has 20-person roller coaster trains. Hiccup's Wing Gliders, another roller coaster with a single track but 2 load areas, can accommodate 12 guests per train. I think we're looking at somewhere around 2,000 people an hour there. And beyond this, there's the untrainable Dragon Show in the Isle of Berk. I believe the theater seats just under 1,000 people. The show is 20 minutes, so when the park is up and running, it should have 2 shows every hour, with an hourly throughput of around 1,900 guests. Everything else, however, is going to be much lower in terms of hourly throughput, in some cases substantially so. Minecart Madness, again that Donkey Kong ride, I doubt will ever reach 1,000 guests per hour in terms of practical operations. Like I said, in certain ways, I really do admire this. It's like Universal Creative said they are going to create attractions as they wanted to create them without that much thought to operations. Honestly, this is how you get some of the best attractions in the industry. In practice, Rise of the Resistance over at Disney tends to hover around 1,300 or 1,400 people per hour, a relatively low throughput for the amount of money that Disney spent on this experience. But Rise is an absolutely great attraction, but one that can't accommodate that many guests each day. The rides at Epic Universe seem designed for maximum experience, not for maximum capacity. But on the flip side here, there's a significant trade-off. Lower capacity attractions will make this park difficult to operate and will lead to guest disappointment. There are multiple attractions in Epic that will have throughputs of under 1,000 guests per hour. Dragon Racer Rally, sort of an extreme version of Dumbo's Flying Elephants, is somewhere between 400 and 500 guests per hour. Another low-capacity attraction is Fire Drill, also in the Isle of Berk, a ride mostly for kids, where once in a boat you blast water at targets. The boats hold 8 people each, and load and unload here is slow. This is another ride that has a realistic throughput of around 500, maybe 600 guests per hour. When I was there during technical previews, I was able to walk right into the pre-show area for Le Cirque Arcanu. This is an impressive stage show which we'll talk about in more detail next week. But in this, I could also see that the already built extended queue for this experience, which would be used after the grand opening, was going to hold a lot of people. During technical previews, the show times were every 30 minutes for Le Cirque Arcanu. Maybe this could be tightened up a little bit, but the extended queue, from what I saw of it, I'm pretty sure had enough room to fill about 5 shows worth of guests before even hitting the pre-show area. So with the pre-show and the extended queue, this could be a 2.5 to 3 hour wait simply to see the show inside that tent. Capacity was the one thought that I repeatedly had as I moved through the park, as I saw low capacity attraction after low capacity attraction with very lovely but also very long queue structures. And this, from what I can tell, will be the park's largest shortcoming. Some very long lines once it opens to the general public. Then add in a lot of people using Express Pass, which will only compound this problem. The second issue that I was overtly aware of was how deeply disconnected this park is from the rest of the Universal Resort. One of the biggest strengths of Disney World is being inside of a controlled environment where the regular world of work and school seems a million miles away, what people often call the Disney bubble. Epic Universe is a satellite offshoot of the main Universal campus. It's about 4 miles away from everything else Universal. Once you're inside the park, the environment is fairly well controlled. But the trip from the main Universal campus over to Epic takes you through the city, past strip malls, chain restaurants, gas stations, and so on. Essentially, you lose the resort vibe. Also, the road into the Epic parking lot and the bus area reveals a lot of back-of-house and partially themed areas. Now, it's true that over at Hollywood Studios, there's some similar issues with the backside of the spires at Galaxy's Edge, but the back of the house exposure moving toward Epic is far, far more significant. Third, there's very little for younger guests to do at Epic Universe. Even the Dumbo-like spinner ride in the Isle of Berk has a height minimum of 48 inches, which usually means a 7 or 8-year-old child. The family coaster there also has a height limit of 40 inches, where at Disney, Slinky Dog Dash has a height limit of 38 inches. The reason here is simple. Like most experiences at Universal, the family coaster here in the Dragon area of the park is a slightly more extreme version of what Disney offers. More on this in a second. But to put it simply, the park does not cater to families with younger children, specifically those in 1st or 2nd grade or younger. Fourth, and I would say this is a related concern, Epic does not cater to multi-generational groups on a family vacation. And by that I mean a group of grandparents, parents, and kids. There's a reason that the Magic Kingdom is the most visited park in Orlando year after year after year. If you're on a multi-generational vacation, there are many rides and experiences that will interest young kids, teenagers, parents, and grandparents. More importantly, there's a good number of rides and attractions these groups can experience together. With the exception of the shows at Epic, both of which are very good, and the Yoshi Dark Ride and the Carousel, there's very little here that a multi-generational family could experience together at Epic, and in ways this seems particularly short-sighted. It also means that there's certain family vacation groups that simply aren't being wooed from Disney over to Epic because of this issue. I can't tell you the number of conversations that I've had with grandparents at Disney who've told me that they live in state and are taking their grandkids to see the mouse for a few days. I can tell you, however, the exact number of conversations that I've had like this at Universal, which is 0. Though I should point out that I've spent more time at Disney than at Universal. Fifth, and this one might be a little more idiosyncratic to me, but the park layout is not the most intuitive. Modern parks rely on recognizable layout design, typically starting with an entrance promenade that moves you or then introduces you to the main layout system that defines the park. Disneyland or the Magic Kingdom, for example, has an entrance promenade and then a hub and spoke layout. Animal Kingdom is mostly a loop layout. Epcot has an adapted figure 8 layout. That is, there are certain overall layout strategies that are burnt into the minds of theme park fans, existing strategies that make new parks easier to navigate. Epic, to begin with, oddly doesn't have this familiar entrance promenade. You simply step right into the park, then there are the rides, sort of like the layout for some of the early Six Flags parks. Beyond this, Epic is technically an adapted hub and spoke layout, but its hub is not circular, it's rather a figure 8, with themed portals spaced irregularly around it, also a hotel entrance. It's also an incredibly big hub system. To walk all the way around the hub at Epic is around 2/3 of a mile, give or take. Part of the visual efficiency of the Disneyland or Magic Kingdom hub is that the hub is about the size of a city roundabout. The one at Disney World admittedly is a little larger than the one at Disneyland, but in both you can just stand there and look at your options: a jungle area for adventure, a fort for Frontierland, a castle for fantasy, and futuristic architecture for Tomorrowland. The hub at Epic is so large, you can't easily see from one side of it to the other. Plus, there are those figure 8 paths that curve through it, the carousel and the coaster. So you can't easily see your options. Each portal does have an icon rising from the top of it. For example, for the Wizarding World, it's a human hand holding a magical wand. And these icons are mostly viewable right now. But my sense is that as the landscaping package matures, essentially as those trees grow in, it's going to be more difficult to spot the portal toppers. In the Magic Kingdom, there's really no signs that say Tomorrowland this way, Frontierland that way. But there are signs in Epic which suggest that the layout is less intuitive than it could be. Anyways, I found the layout here a minor issue, and again, that might be more me than everyone else. Sixth, right now it's a very hot park. There's a landscape package that has been installed, but it's going to take a few years. Even with Florida rains, my guess it will take 2 to 3 years before these trees mature to provide sufficient shade. And outside of the Potter area, most walkways don't have tall buildings to block the sun. In a way, I shouldn't list this as an issue, as this problem will solve itself after a few growing seasons, but presently I was far more aware of the heat in Epic than I was in any of the Disney parks on my last trip. Not even the Tomorrowland section of the Magic Kingdom felt as hot as Epic. So this is simply something to keep on your radar. And keep in mind, I was there in April and still found it hot. Then again, though I once lived in Florida, I'm now a thin-blooded Californian. 7th, you should be aware that in terms of age, the sweet spot for Epic Universe, as with all of the American Universal parks, is between late tweens to the early 30s range. It's a park that has arranged itself largely for older adolescents up through young adults. A good example of this is Dragon Racer Rally, which, as I mentioned, is an adaptation of the Dumbo spinner attraction over at Magic Kingdom. On Dumbo, you can control the up and down movement of your elephant. You're also held in with a canvas lap restraint. On Dragon Racers, you have control of each so-called dragon wing. You don't control the up and down so much as you control the left and right turning movements, with each car having a center pivot. It is possible by alternating left and then right, also with some leaning, to get your dragon car to do a barrel roll fully upside down. Instead of a canvas lap restraint, on Dragon Racers you're inside of a shoulder harness, much like the harness system for a coaster that has inversions. And this right here generally illustrates the age range difference. Universal has adapted some Disney-style ride concepts, but has reworked them so they have a more intense experience geared to an older audience. Dragon Racers has a height restriction of 48 inches, so that's kids who are typically 7 or 8 years old and up, while Dumbo over at the Magic Kingdom has no height restriction at all, even though the underlying experience as a flat spinner attraction is similar. 8th, the park, at least until its landscaping package grows in, looks far, far better at night when Universal can control the illumination and color values through impressive systems arranged throughout the park. I've heard that there are more than 7 million programmable lights in the park, but at least during its initial opening period, this park will only be open from 9 in the morning until 9 at night. In Central Florida for most of the summer, the sun sets around 8:30, meaning that guests here will only sample a little of the park when it looks its best. But also I do understand why they're doing this. Universal is likely anticipating that overnight crews will need many hours each night for maintenance, especially on Monsters Unchained and the Battle for the Ministry of Magic, to keep these attractions running each day. 9th, and this is another odd one. There are a lot, and I mean a whole lot of stairs, specifically in Super Nintendo World. I have never been to a theme park with this many stairs. Multiple flights of stairs up and down in a row, not only in the queue areas, but in the lands themselves. There's already a whole lot of walking in theme parks. The stairs are going to be an unwelcome feature for a lot of guests late in the day, but now add in parents with strollers and a limited number of elevators to get around those stairs. 10th, in large part, this park was designed by designers who are deeply familiar with Florida. But oddly, it wasn't designed for Florida weather, where it can rain every afternoon, sometimes for hours, particularly in the summer and early fall. If it rains, here are the attractions that will close: Yoshi's Adventure, Stardust Racers, Minecart Madness, the Toothless Meet and Greet area, Hiccup's Wing Gliders, Fire Drill, Dragon Racers Rally, Curse of the Werewolf, which leaves only 4 rides that can operate in the rain: Thankfully, these four are mostly headliners: Monsters Unchained, Battle for the Ministry of Magic, the Mario Kart attraction, and the Constellation Carousel. I should point out that Disney will have this exact same problem for its Cars Land expansion area in Frontierland when it's built. Everything there is outside as well. But for a park with only 11 attractions as well as meet and greet areas, rain will make the capacity issues here even worse. Lastly, and this one I think is actually pretty big, it's not yet a full-day park. There are multiple expansion pads around the periphery of Epic Universe, so it can become one. What unfortunately will make it a full-day experience presently will be some very long queue lines. Mini queues should be 2 to 3 hours after Epic Universe officially opens. But if you had Express Pass, and assuming that Express Pass gets you on each experience in under 15 minutes, you could easily finish everything this park has to offer in under 6 hours. And I don't mean to sound overly negative about the limited number of attractions. There are lovely places to eat in the wizarding world that's themed to Paris of the 1920s, and that too can fill out a day at the park. Part of the vibe of this particular park is to simply enjoy the theming. But in terms of a count, there are 11 actual rides and 2 shows at Epic. Compare this to Hollywood Studios over at Disney, another park that's on the short side of attractions, where there are also 11 rides but 5 shows of substance. So Epic presently offers fewer comparable experiences than Hollywood Studios. So both with the capacity issues and the overall number of attractions, in an ideal world, I would think that Universal's best path forward is to continue building out on some of those Epic expansion pads, as it will help with the capacity and throughput issues. And I think some of these issues, specifically very long lines, may be a PR concern as we move through the summer. But also, Epic has new experiences right now, which can be leveraged through advertising, and so long as new guests keep coming to Epic to see those new experiences, Universal might more realistically be financially incentivized to freshen up some areas at their other 2 parks in Florida. So though objectively I can see that Epic needs more ride capacity to make it a more workable park, I don't think that is what realistically is next on tap for the Universal Resort here. But now I want to shift over to the other side of things. I want to list off some strengths, and the strengths here are also substantial. So let's now get into all of that. At the very top of this list is the Harry Potter area, which is beyond stunning, and we've already talked about that a good deal. So second on this list, the park is filled with unique ride systems that you can't experience anywhere outside of a Universal park. This is a huge plus in making this park feel unique. Sure, there are some rides that use existing ride systems. Hiccup's Wing Glider is a lately themed family coaster. Yoshi's Adventure is a dark ride system, like an Omnimover that moves past stage areas. Stardust Racers is a very smooth coaster with some signature moves, but not meaningfully different from what you could experience elsewhere. But the Battle for the Ministry of Magic has a vertical omnidirectional lift system, which means you go up, down, forward, and around past screens and animatronics. Monsters Unchained uses an adapted Kuka arm system on a track. Minecraft Madness, that's the Donkey Kong ride, uses what I will call a double-decker track system. There's a fake track that you appear to be riding over, but the actual track and wheelbase for the ride is about 5 or 6 feet below the bottom of your ride car. Dragon Racers Rally is a significant adaptation of a Dumbo spinner-type ride in which the ride vehicles, they're dragons here and not elephants, can do barrel rolls. Bowser's Challenge, that is the Mario Kart ride, not so much for the ride system, but for the augmented reality visors it uses to create a gameplay environment in front and around you. And then there's the Constellation Carousel, where the menagerie of rideable animals are arranged on a unique moving turntable with 3 platforms that rotate within the larger system. Each animal is also capped with a color-changing light which looks lovely at night. Third, if you felt that Universal has overused screens and attractions in the last 20 years, this park is more focused on physical sets and animatronics than other parks. There are some screens in the attractions, particularly Ministry of Magic and to a lesser extent Monsters Unchained, but overall the screens here are used sparingly and aren't the center of the experience, again for the exception of Ministry of Magic. Also, no 3D glasses anywhere. And most of the animatronics throughout the park, some of them here are extremely impressive, particularly in Monsters Unchained, enhance the attraction experience overall, or even the outdoor sections of the land. There are even some outdoor animatronics or mechanical dragon figures in the Isle of Berk, and I've been told once the park is actually open, there will be drones overhead in this area supporting 2 dragons, one of which may breathe fire. Fourth, the level of street entertainment or streetmosphere characters is pretty fabulous. I don't think I saw any streetmosphere players wandering around over in the Super Nintendo area, but they are out in force in Dark Universe and the Isle of Berk. In ways, this is where Galaxy's Edge over at Disney cut back on operational expenses by removing a number of planned experiences, including meet and greets and an outdoor show on the overhead catwalks that would have involved actors and stunt performers. Parts of Galaxy's Edge feel empty because this never arrived. Here, though, are street characters out in full force. And specifically, I mean characters outside of meet and greet locations. In Dark Universe, the Invisible Man wrapped in white bandages and wearing shades is out trading quips with guests. There's a vampire who plays her violin while letting the audience know that they remain alive because they are being protected. And Igor lugs his suitcase, what he calls his mobile lab, from place to place while talking with guests, as he readies for presumably his next experiment. Fifth on my list, and let me just insert this one again more as a personal note. I love that there's a land focused on the 1930s monster movies. It's one of the few genres in early Hollywood cinema that hasn't been incorporated into a permanent and deeply detailed land until now. And Walt Disney himself even had the idea of using these same monsters or something similar to them back in the early 1960s at Disneyland for an early unbuilt version of the Haunted Mansion. And this, of course, is long before Universal had a theme park and before Universal started its backlot tram tours. Back then, there was a lot more cooperation, discussion, and camaraderie between the two studios. Specifically, Walt and Imagineer Ken Anderson explored an early version for the Haunted Mansion that would have relied on some of the cinematic icons from the Universal catalog. A version of the mansion that was more focused on a dark wedding. Here's what Ken Anderson had to say years later about it. Walt had the idea that there was going to be a wedding underway in the house. At the time, we talked about Dracula and Frankenstein and other Universal monsters. We were trying to get in everybody. So even Walt recognized that these characters would likely play well in a theme park environment. Scary but not overly realistic, like dark, dreamlike apparitions. In fact, one of the Universal monsters did actually appear at Disneyland for a while. Specifically, the Phantom of the Opera character once walked around Main Street in the early 1960s, a character whose visual appearance was based on the Lon Chaney character in the 1925 Universal film. This is the exact same character who is now in Monsters Unchained. Sixth, the queues. Many of them are filled with interesting visual details, even animatronics. So there's been a lot of money spent to make the wait feel more like the show. Also, most of the queue areas are either indoors or under shade, and this will be important as we discuss how the park works. Seventh, and I realize this is another odd point, but parking here works far better than at Universal's main campus. The main campus is a parking garage with moving walkways. It feels a lot like going to the mall. The parking lot at Epic is all outdoors, surface parking lot with a drop-off and an Uber area, pretty much the same as most of the Florida Disney parks. Eighth, the portal structures as entry areas to the land work far better than entrance areas at most Universal parks, or even at a few Disney parks. At Universal's Island of Adventure, one land blends or melts into the next. At Epic, there are clear markers as to what is and to what is not in the land, and the portals, as goofy as this concept sounds, do clearly express that you are moving from one themed area into another. I say goofy because for decades, Disney has used the term portal to mean a themed passageway that transitions guests from one area to the next. The walkway beneath the Main Street train station is, for example, a portal, but none of the Disney portals look like a portal. They only function like a portal. The portals at Universal, oddly, look like portals out of a science fiction film. This has been a running joke in some parts of the theme park industry for the last year, that maybe Universal didn't understand that portal was only a visual metaphor, not a prescriptive description of how something should look. But in terms of introducing a new themed land, they work far better than the rough juxtaposition of themed areas elsewhere at Universal parks. So in terms of overall design, I do see this as a win. And ninth, the entrance to the park itself is not filled with souvenir shops and souvenir carts. Remember, there's no traditional entrance promenade here like Main Street or Hollywood Boulevard over at the studios. There is, however, one large souvenir shop, but that's not the visual focus of the entrance area. So even though Epic dispenses with a traditional entrance promenade, which I think is a familiarity problem, its removal places the focus from the start here more on the rides, attractions, and theming than on shopping, and this I think is a nice touch. And now that we've looked at one area, the Potter area with its beautiful Paris theming, and also talked about the park's overall strengths and weaknesses, we need to make our way through the park from land to land to point out some things that caught my attention. But that is where we're going to start next week when we conclude our pre-opening discussion about Epic Universe. I'll be back next week to conclude our discussion about Epic Universe. But let me just point out one quick thing before I go. As we've talked about, domestic travel is down right now, as is foreign travel. No doubt paid previews aren't going quite as Universal had hoped in terms of sales now that there's economic uncertainty in the air. A couple of days ago, Universal opened paid previews to anyone who would like to buy a ticket. Previously, previews had been locked down to cast members, pass holders, those staying at a Universal hotel, and holders of a Universal Visa account. During any other year, Universal would have sold enough tickets to cover capacity as team members move through technical previews to get everything working with just these original groups. But now it's open for anyone who would like to go. My main concern with Epic Universe is capacity and long queue times once the park hits its general opening date. If you want to see the park, I have a feeling that you're going to have a far, far better experience if you go before May 22nd, which is its grand opening. While the park still has lower crowds, probably the earlier you can go, the better, as I can already see that Universal has started to creep up capacity slowly to train team members with larger crowds the closer they get to that opening date. If you've heard that you can only see Epic if you buy a 3-day ticket to all the Universal parks in Florida, at least for previews right now, that is all out the window. The level of Central Florida visitation is simply not there to support this plan at the moment. You can buy a 1-day, 1-park ticket for Epic between $144 and $154, depending on the day for a preview time. Early May probably represents your best opportunity to see this park before opening crowds hit it. Tickets are date-based, so you should purchase online before visiting. And one more thing. If you can go on a weekday. It may be your last chance for a few years to see this park mostly empty. Lastly, as you know, we're an ad-free, listener-supported podcast. We do just 2 things. Deep dives on stories related to the history of the Disney studio and the parks, and news and analysis of current events as they relate to the Disney company. We are funded entirely by listener contributions, specifically by listeners who join us over on Bandcamp as monthly subscribers. On Bandcamp, you will find over 300 episodes not available on iTunes or anywhere else. But the best reason to join us there is to support the work we do here and to make sure that this podcast continues to exist. You can support us by becoming a monthly subscriber at dhipodcast.bandcamp.com. I'll also leave a link down in our show notes. So, until next Sunday, this is Todd James Pierce.